Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today as we talk about Disability 101 thinking and think outside the box. I am so happy that you're with us for this Disability Employment Initiative webinar series. And we are here from the Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation, and we're looking forward to spending this time with you exploring exactly what Disability 101 is and moving the conversation forward. My name is Carolyn Phillips, and I am the Director of Tools for Life and also for the service and education components of the Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation. I've been in this field for well over 27 years now, and I am thrilled to have this conversation with you, and I hope that it's a conversation that continues long after we leave. So know that you can ask us questions now, but you can also reach out to us later. I'm going to turn it to Liz to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Liz Persad. I'm the Program and Outreach Manager for the Tools for Life program, which is here at the Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation. I'm very excited to be with you all today talking about a subject matter that I am very passionate about. As a professional living with a disability, I am excited to be here today to talk to you all about some awesome resources and tips when it comes to just understanding more about disability and Disability 101, if you will. So I will pass the microphone now to my team member, Danny Housley.
Good morning, everybody. I am the Assistive Technology Acquisition Manager here at Tools for Life. And again, like with everybody else, I am very excited, very passionate about disability empowerment, disability rights. I've worked in this field for not as long as Carolyn, but I've got a little over a decade in. And yeah, we're excited to explore this topic with you a little more.
We have an amazing team. I'm so glad that Liz and Danny are with us. When we were thinking about, gosh, who should actually be doing this webinar, honestly, Danny and Liz are nationally known for their work in this space, and I'm excited about what they're going to share with us today. So Liz, if you will walk us through kind of a foundational information about the webinar.
Absolutely. So on this next slide, we've just got a quick checklist that I want to run through before we jump into the content of today's webinar. I wanted to let everyone know that we are recording and archiving today's webinar. We actually have some awesome plans to do a whole post-production piece to really record this webinar and get it packaged so that way y'all can utilize it. It'll be put up online, and this will be a great resource for you guys to use for many years to come. We wanted to let you know that we do not have microphone rights enabled for participants, but the way that you will be communicating with us today is by typing your comments and questions in the chat box, which is in the middle area, the lower right corner of your screen. And Tori Holder from the Tools for Life team put in a welcome message, so that's the area that you'll be looking out for comments and questions. Carolyn, Danny, and I will be reading all of the comments and questions out loud before we answer it, so that way all the information is captured appropriately. And again, we just wanted to let you know that today's webinar is live captioned. Hello to Heather from CIDI, from the captioning team, for being on with us today. So everybody can see your captions below the PowerPoint slide, and you'll be able to adjust your color settings and your font size and anything that you need as well too. So today's webinar is an interactive presentation because we do encourage you all to type in your comments and your questions and really just be thinking thoughtfully about how the information that we're presenting today is really presented in your life as a professional, but also just as you're out and about in the community as well too. So our presentation today will also have a focus on the positive impact of using assistive technology. A lot of our discussion today is going to center on a brief history of disability culture, understanding the difference between medical and social model of disability. We'll touch on a little bit about identity and people first language, and also share communication and etiquette tips for interacting with people with disabilities. And all of these topics are absolutely important with your daily interactions of people living with disabilities in any appropriate settings and environments. We also have some learning objectives, and we just want to read through this so that y'all know kind of where we're headed with today's presentation. So just know that you're going to leave today with knowledge, skills, and abilities to assist in the collective work to build inclusive communities, educational systems, and workplaces. So at the end of today's session, your first learning objective will be that you'll be able to identify 3 key elements of the medical and social model of disability. Secondly, you'll be able to list 5 tips for communicating with people living with a variety of disabilities. And lastly, you'll be able to identify and avoid value-laden language related to people with disabilities.
Thank you so much, Liz. That information is also important because what we're trying to do is practice what we teach, which is making the learner aware of what it is we're trying to teach and how they can incorporate that information. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that's actually the way we're doing this whole presentation is modeling how to be disability friendly, if you will. Building on that, this is actually, I think, a beautiful part of legislation, and it comes directly from the Assistive Technology Act, which is the act that funds the Tools for Life program and all the 56 programs around the states and territories that are Assistive Technology Act programs. And it says disability is natural. I absolutely believe that. Disability is a natural part of the human experience and in no way should diminish the rights of individuals to live independently, benefit from education, make their own choices, pursue meaningful careers, and really enjoy that full inclusion and integration into economic and social and cultural and political and educational mainstreams. That is something I hope that you'll keep in mind as we move throughout this conversation, but also moving forward. And you're going to hear this as we're talking and as Danny's teaching more about the medical model, that when we say disability is natural, it really means to us that indeed it's something that we're born with. And so with my dyslexia, my dysgraphia, my learning disabilities that absolutely would affect my life and do affect my life, but thankfully to assistive technology, I'm able to read and write and do math and all of that independently. That I was born with learning disabilities. So it's not about curing, but it's actually about respecting and understanding and celebrating that difference is there. And so, Liz, I know you're going to build on this.
Yes. So just to piggyback on what Carolyn was talking about in regards to disability being natural, there are some facts to consider, and these are things that I believe we all know about, but it's so important to repeat this and to really understand it. So we know that people with disabilities are the largest minority group in America. This group cuts across racial, ethnic, religious, gender, and age boundaries. It doesn't matter what your life looks like. Disability can occur at any point in time. And truly, anyone can become a member of this minority group at any point in time. So it's important that we all work together to understand more about disability so that not only for our personal lives, but for the folks that we're working with and anybody that we're encountering in the community, we've got those helpful tips and resources so that we can all bring our best attitudes and best giving nature forward, if you will. So now we're going to jump a little bit into disability awareness and culture and just share a few more resources and just tips when it comes to interaction and just a little bit more of the background of disability awareness and culture. So I think we can all agree that disability awareness is important. There are more than 1 billion people with disabilities in the world who must overcome challenges every day, and this includes stigmatization. As a society, we are all different and must recognize the importance of acceptance. I think we can all agree that disability awareness is important because it's an important idea, and it's very important for all of us to understand what it's like to break those stereotypes, to overcome those preconceptions regarding disabilities. And we're going to say this time and time again today. It's all about that lack of education, maybe that fear of the unknown, if you will. So it's important for us to learn these important resources so we can educate not only ourselves but our coworkers and others that we interact with in the community. Learning about disabilities, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, and taking part in awareness activities and events, just like this webinar, is a step towards breaking these barriers and promoting positive, active change.
So disability is absolutely a consequence of the environment. I say this all the time, and I think that anyone with a disability could tell you that that's indeed true. I don't think about my dyslexia until you give me something, a form to fill out. If I'm visiting your center, or if I'm trying to do something on your computers that are set out for public access, and I can't use my screen reader, that you haven't set it up in a way that allows me to use my voice instead of typing. So the disability piece, this is a very important and fundamental piece to understand, that it is a consequence of the environment. Now, the good news is that what we can do through technology and re-engineering and assistive technology and universal design and inclusive design is we can accommodate for that environment. We can take that away, and then that way we level the playing field and allow for everybody to do their best, if you will. So I'm going to turn it over to Danny so he can talk to you a little bit more about this, and especially I love that quote, Danny, that you have here.
Yeah, so this is a quote from Joseph Shapiro, and it says, "Disability is not a medical problem. The problem is the built environment and the barriers that society puts up. It's not about the inability to move or breathe without a ventilator. It's about the inability to get into a classroom." So when you look at just that basic access, again, like Carolyn said, with me, I have a visual disability, and until I encounter a barrier, I don't feel disabled. It's the barrier, the environment, the surroundings that are a disabling factor, not anything to do with me. So when we look at disability culture, one definition we have here is people with disabilities have forged a group identity. We share a common history of oppression and a common bond of resilience. We generate art, music, literature, and other expressions of our lives and our culture, infused from our experience of disability. Most importantly, we are proud of ourselves as people with disabilities. We claim our disabilities with pride as part of our identity. We are who we are people with disabilities. And that is a quote from Stephen E. Brown, who's the co-founder of the Institute on Disability Culture, and this was published in 1996. But it really kind of drives home a lot of the points for disability culture. We're united by that common sense of oppression. We have things that have brought us together as a community, regardless of what your disability type is. And from that, we've created art, we've created music. There are languages that are specific to people with disabilities. There's a lot of stuff that goes into to uniting us, despite what the perceived differences might be. So there definitely is a strong sense of culture when you look at all of those different factors. And this is just kind of reiterating some of that. We share a common history of oppression and a common bond of resilience. It's through those barriers that we're facing, that we're breaking down, that we do come together and we are stronger as a community and as individuals for navigating those barriers of life. So when we look at disability and disability culture, there are two big models that we often bring up. The first is the medical model. So this was kind of the, I'll put that in air quotes, traditional approach that had taken place for a very long time. This is part of the oppression that the disability community has faced. So when you look at the medical model, the focus is on fixing the individual. It's on the impairment or the differences, and how can you fix that person so that they can fit in with society. The emphasis is on dependence. It's on having people do things for you. With that, you're focusing on the impairment rather than the person. And an institution is the norm when it comes to this model. It's seen as easier to stick somebody in an institution and have somebody take care of all of their needs rather than that individual being in charge of their life and the basic decisions that are involved with their life. So when to get up, when to have a snack, do you want to go out and get some fresh air? Those are decisions that are taken away when you look at the medical model. And then also the environmental and design barriers make it difficult to have a successful future. So if the overriding idea is that you need to be in an institution, why do you need to go out and get a job? Why do you need to go out and go to the grocery store? So it puts up a lot of barriers for the individual and restricts a lot of the basic freedoms that they have. The response to the medical model that came around in late 60s and into the 70s was the social model of disability. So this is where you really see empowerment coming through. So when we look at that, disability, it's caused by the way society is organized rather than by a person's impairment or difference. It's looking at that disability is socially created. Again, I'm not the problem. It is the environment that I'm in that's the problem. So it kind of goes back to that disability being a consequence of the environment. The focus is on removal of barriers. We want to make sure that people can get out of that institution, that they can access their community, get a job, be successful. We want to make sure that people have the freedom and the ability to do that. The traditional medical model, it didn't explain the personal experience of a person with a disability, and it also didn't help them develop more inclusive ways of living. So again, going back to that medical model, the focus is on institutionalization. It doesn't care about what your lived experience is. They're trying to have more of a cookie cutter approach with the medical model. They want everybody to be able to fit into a certain way. And then finally, people with disabilities define what disability is. That's important. That is self-actualization. That is being in control of defining your experience in this world. And something to think about. So throughout the presentation, we're going to have these moments of just things for you to think about, to reflect on. So something to think about is, when did you feel engaged with or in the disability community? And that could be from your experience as a person with a disability. It could be from your experience working with people with disabilities. When did you feel engaged with that? So just kind of think about that as we're moving through some of these topics and some of these talking points. All right, and now we're going to go into independent living philosophy. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Before I came to Tools for Life, I did work at a Center for Independent Living. Currently, I am the board chair for a Center for Independent Living, so I am very, very much engaged with this topic. So this slide says buy in for, and on the right is a gentleman in a wheelchair. That is Ed Roberts, who is the kind of founder of disability or independent living philosophy, and he's holding a sign that says Civil Rights for Disabled. He was one of the first and most vocal advocates for independent living. So this philosophy, it's a result of the social model of disability. It is about empowering people with disabilities. It is about embracing the differences that we have. And Ed Roberts, he was really behind the concept for independent living centers. And there's a couple of different ways that you may see these referred to. There's ILCs, or independent living centers, or you might see CIL, CIL, which is Center for Independent Living. So this is a quote from a UC Berkeley official. So Ed Roberts, he applied for UC Berkeley, and what they found later on when they're looking at his applications was somebody wrote, "We've tried cripples before and it didn't work." It was the 70s. It was okay to say that. It wasn't really okay, but it was socially accepted at the time to say things like that. That is a big thing to unpack right there. So the fact that you could just say, well, we've tried it before, it didn't work, so we're not going to bother trying it again. Ed Roberts was a very vocal advocate, and he did get admitted to UC Berkeley. And because of his advocacy, we were able to get the first independent living center at UC Berkeley. He was the founder. And when they started, there were 4 core concepts, 4 core services that these centers would provide. First is peer support. So working with somebody with a similar disability, a similar lived experience, sharing those strategies, sharing how you broke down barriers, that's important. That is at the very core of every Center for Independent Living. Advocacy on both a personal and a systems level. So enacting change for yourself, whether it could be better living conditions or getting a ramp or getting Braille added, to signs on for yourself or on a systems level when you're looking at a larger scale of advocacy. So contacting your elected officials, having community change kind of go into effect. That's all part of that advocacy. Independent living skills training. So again, learning from one another, ways of, it could be something as simple as hygiene. It could be budgeting. It could be, how do I navigate the transit system in the area that I live in? Any of those skills that help a person live independently, that help them engage with their community, whether it's for work or play or whatever it might be. And then information and referral. That was the fourth service that they provided. So having a database of resources that a person could call into, they could come in and get resources in their community that they could contact to be to enact a change or to get additional information. So those were the four main ones. And then recently, within the last 4 years, they added transition, because a lot of the work of independent living centers was centered around moving people out of institutions and back into the community. It was also successfully transitioning from living with mom and dad to living on your own or with the necessary supports that you need. So since so much of the work was centered around that, the independent living centers, they embraced that and they added that as an official fifth service, which is fantastic, because that transition, it really encapsulates all of those other services, because you have peer support, you have advocacy, you're learning skills as you're working on that transition, and you're learning about the resources at your disposal. And there is a button off to the right here that just says nothing about us without us, and that is important. That is making sure that decisions are not being made without the input of the community that it's affecting. And we use that for the disability community, but that nothing about us without us is definitely something that counts on a number of levels for a number of groups.
You are exactly right, Danny. And as we move to thinking about what are the attitudinal barriers, we really want you to think about, how do you move beyond curbs? How do you move beyond what's mandated by the law? How do you move beyond tolerance? The Americans with Disabilities Act, when I read that, I actually think that really is more about tolerance as opposed to celebration, acceptance, embracing, all of that. And when we move to the next slide, understanding some of those attitudinal barriers and confronting them and addressing them when they come up. So we would encourage you, building upon those that great information that Danny just shared with you about this important resource and understanding some of the history, there are some other things that would be helpful for you to help us address and help us raise awareness. I think that a lot of times employers and family members and people with disabilities, they have these barriers that could be internal. It could also be external. There are lots of barriers that we face every day. It could be a physical thing, just like I was saying, disability is a consequence of the environment. But there's systemic barriers to employment and also some of the civic programs that are out there. Most of those barriers really can be overcome if we can shift the attitude. It's often an attitude, and we can give you some examples of that. Unfortunately, we can give you very current examples of that. The UC Berkeley quote that Danny shared with us, that's an attitudinal barrier. And so how do we actually move through that? Sometimes we find that people, it's a lack of experience, it's a lack of understanding or misunderstanding. It could be, ignorance, it could be fear. Who knows where some of these come from? But any marginalized community, and a lot of us are within marginalized communities, we understand that we've got to move beyond that and really see what's the full potential of each person, including folks with disabilities, and what can folks with disabilities achieve. So what I'd like you to think about as we're moving through this part of the types of attitudinal barriers, just think about what does that really look like when it comes to inferiority. I still see this. Liz and I have talked about this even recently. Danny and I were in a meeting yesterday when we were talking about voting rights. And even within the meeting, they were talking about really folks with disabilities being second-class citizens. They didn't come out and say it, But what they were saying is, you know what? You could vote separately, and then we'll count your votes after if we need them. And that's not okay. We still run into that, though, in the employment situations. Pity is the other one, that people feel sorry for people with disabilities. And that really can be patronizing. And I've got to tell you, as a person with disabilities, I can tell when somebody's approaching me either as I'm a second-class citizen or from a pity standpoint. I can tell. And it's important that we also address that we let people know, and that we actually model, and in your role, in your positions, that you model a positive attitude towards folks with disabilities. Now, the flip side of all of that is hero worship. I was in a meeting and I was taking notes, and apparently when I write, you can actually tell that I have dyslexia, and I spelled something correctly, and people were like, "Oh, that's so great that you spelled that correctly," and I'm like, "Oh, Lord, I bet everybody in this room can spell that word." But there was this kind of flip side of, "Oh, it's amazing, Carolyn, what you've accomplished with all of your disabilities," and blah, 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 blah. I really want you to see me for my faults, for my weaknesses, for my strengths, just as I am. And so making sure that we're not saying people with disabilities are brave or that they're special, just for having a disability. Now, indeed, we can say that, Danny, you do outstanding things all the time. Liz, rock star in so many areas. Those are legit, but it's legit because of who you are, not necessarily because you have a disability. So when we move to the next slide, I think it's important to also think about what does it look like when we, see ignorance, and how can we raise awareness? What we've done is actually tried to do things exactly like what we're doing right now, which is disability awareness. You could spread the word around. You could have them listen to this webinar. A lot of people have incorporated these types of webinars or these types of information sessions into every orientation for every employee that's going to be interacting with anyone, including people with disabilities, so that you can raise awareness and get rid of that ignorance, if you will. The spread effect, that the disability, and this, I see this often, that people assume that individuals' disability negatively affects other senses or abilities or traits. My daughter, who uses a speech device, people often are yelling at her, and they think she has a hearing-related disability. And I'm like, she hears you fine, and she actually will tell you, "I hear you" on her speech device. You don't have to talk so loud. Just because she has difficulty with speech doesn't mean you have to talk so loudly. Stereotypes. This is another thing that happens. When folks generalize about disabilities. They have met one person that has some type of vision-related disabilities, and they're like, "Oh, you know what? Everybody that has vision-related disabilities has amazing hearing." And no, not necessarily. Perhaps, but not necessarily. Same thing happens within any number of other disabilities. So the stereotypes, we would encourage you to put a stop to those and let people know that people are people, basically. The other thing that we have seen, and this is unfortunately on the rise, we have seen this recently, is that there is a backlash of, "Oh, you know what? This company is looking specifically for people with disabilities, and it's only because they have a disability, and it's unfair." Or within an individual's work, I've seen this even recently, that, "Oh, you know what? That person doesn't have to do as much as I do because they have a disability." Those things none of these attitudinal barriers are really helpful. They are indeed barriers. And so anything we can do to address those and help people move beyond that is important. If you move to the next slide, there are some things that happen when we start doing that, whether it's isolation, and there are folks that I know who have disabilities that feel very isolated within the work environment, and it's because they don't, because they actually are seeing all of these different barriers, and it's affecting their self-esteem. That lack of self-worth, and sometimes what often Danny and Liz and I are doing for each other, but also for other folks, is making sure that we are aware and saying, hey, good job on this thing that you're doing, to increase their self-worth and self-esteem, but in a legitimate way. You also find that there could be a lack of empowerment that happens, and learned helplessness, where somebody will say eventually, gosh, I really can't do that. I've seen it once again recently. There was a person that I was working with who is a dynamic speaker, and they have had their I guess confidence shaken recently, and so then they're like, oh no, I really can't do these speeches, and then it moved to, oh no, I really can't travel, I can't do this, I can't do that, and then the next thing you know, it's kind of this dynamic of learned helplessness, and it all started with these attitudinal barriers. So anything we can do to change those, everything we can do to change those, changes our society for the better. And if we move to thinking beyond tolerance, really thinking about celebration and acceptance, that's the thing that we really need to think about. Tolerance of differences, it's about the law, and it really doesn't get us to a point where people feel valued. So we've got to move to a stage where we understand that and we value folks. Diversity, it could be one of those things that's addressed at a surface level. Oh, everybody got a button, or everybody got an email that talked about this. But really, there are a lot of things to celebrate within the disability community. A lot of the most creative ideas have come out of the disability community. When I see folks without disabilities using curb cuts, I'm like, yes, you're welcome, right? When I see folks without disabilities using their voice to text or their voice to write emails, I'm like, you're welcome. All of that came from the disability community. Even sending emails, that came from the disability community. The original emails were sent because of hearing-related disabilities. So, moving beyond tolerance, there's a lot to celebrate, and I think that's one of those things to embrace and also to focus on. So what we'd like you to think about and just reflect on, today and moving forward, is how have your perceptions of people with disabilities changed over time? Have you? I know that I've, some of these attitudinal barriers even I've had. And so how have your perceptions changed? And how can that help with folks getting employed and meeting their goals and exceeding their goals, hopefully? I'm going to turn this over to Liz, who does an outstanding job talking about value-laden language and person-first language and really the power of language. So Liz?
Thank you so much, Carolyn. This is actually one of my most favorite parts of this presentation. My parents always said to me when I was growing up, your legs may not work, but your mouth sure does. And be able to use your voice to speak up and make sure that you are heard throughout this world. And so that is something that I take to heart every single day. As Carolyn is sitting here talking about people using their voice to text and send emails and control their environment, I am that person. I am one of those people that uses my voice to not only be heard, but just to live every day and be fully independent. So it's important that we have a better understanding of the power of language, especially as it relates to individuals with disabilities. I wanted to ask everyone, what is value-laden language? How many of you have heard of value-laden language? And if you haven't, I encourage you to get familiar with the idea of it. But basically, value-laden language means that what you say and what you write may enhance the dignity of people with disabilities or inadvertently reflect stereotypes and negative attitudes. So basically, what you say and what you write, it reflects more of your own personal core values than it really does more than what you're describing that person to be. So some of the words and phrases that we often hear don't recognize the broad range of capabilities of people with disabilities. They actually tie back to some of those attitudinal barriers that Carolyn just reviewed with all of you. So again, people with disabilities don't need or want to be pitied, nor should they be deemed courageous or special as they accomplish daily activities or work. And it's important that we pay attention to the words that we speak every day into our language so that we aren't perpetuating those negative stereotypes and those attitudinal barriers. So value-laden language at its heart, it promotes distance, it stereotypes, and it pigeonholes, and it absolutely reduces one's sense of self-worth, power, and self-direction. I think we all have grown up with that saying of sticks and stones will break my bones, but words may never hurt. I've never felt that that was true. Words absolutely hurt. The words that we speak every day can absolutely impact somebody negatively, but it can change your life into a completely positive and absolutely amazing, successful direction. And those are the things that we need to think about. Value-laden language, it often creates categories of we versus they, good versus bad, strong versus weak. When it comes to expectations of our personal responsibilities or even as professionals, high versus low. That whole idea of sick versus well, healthy versus unhealthy, and then superior versus inferior. We don't want categories. We want one lump sum of just people in the world. We're all human beings, and that's what we need to focus on. So here are some words that we often share with folks. This is a small sampling, unfortunately, of some of the words that promotes the distance, these value-laden language terminologies, if you will. So I'll read through some of these, and I just encourage you all to do some more of that self-reflection and think, when was the last time you heard these words? Have these words come out of your mouth? Have these words been spoken by your team members at work or your family members or just people in the community? And what can we all do to help stop that when we hear these words in the future? So things like abnormal, afflicted, burdened, defect, deformity. This one just, gets to me sometimes. Mute, deaf and mute. I hear that so often, and that is such an old, archaic term, saying dumb and mute, deaf and mute. Palsied, spastic, stricken with. Even sufferer. I can't tell you how many times people stop me in the community and they often say things like, oh, it's so good to see you out and about today, but I'm so sorry that you're suffering. That is their story. That is not my personal story. I am probably out and about in the community because I am out with my family and my friends and my loved ones, my husband, having a good meal, shopping, going to the movies, going to a concert, just being out in the community, going to work, getting amazing things accomplished with my team every day. That is not the definition of somebody who's suffering. That certainly isn't the definition of somebody who's a victim either as well. Again, just negative terms for folks with disabilities. That last word, we often ask folks how they say that or how they hear that word. Technically, it's invalid, but often when I see that word and I visualize it and think about it, the word invalid comes to mind. And again, promoting distance and really just perpetuating the negative ideas, stereotypes behind people with disabilities. So we've got a few examples of positive value-laden language. So if you look up here, on the left-hand side, there's a column that says disability negative. And over on the right-hand side is disability neutral. So on the left, what we want to do is move away from that terminology, the words that you see, and we want to move towards more disability neutral terminology. So instead of saying the disabled, the blind, the deaf, we would move towards more positive language, such as people with disabilities, the disability community, even the blind community or the deaf community. All of those are socially accepted because it's not putting an emphasis on the disability, it's more about people living, and they just so happen to be living with a disability. Over on the left-hand side, another example, words like crippled, suffers from, these are all words that we just reviewed, victim of, or invalid. So instead of saying that, we could say that somebody walks with a cane or uses leg braces. Instead of the words impaired or impairment, that individual happens to have a disability. This next one is one that I often like to stress, normal person, healthy, whole, or even wheelchair bound. That is not acceptable terms. So maybe saying person without a disability or non-disabled, or even somebody who just so happens to use a wheelchair or a wheelchair user. The word wheelchair bound, as somebody who uses a power wheelchair, who has used a power wheelchair my whole life, I've gone from stroller to wheelchair. My wheelchair is assistive technology. It's part of my life. It's an extension of my body. If it weren't for this awesome wheelchair, I probably wouldn't be sitting in this room with Danny and Carolyn in the team presenting to y'all. Who knows where I'd be, but I'm able to get around and be fully independent because of this incredible piece of technology. So some more examples. Again, we just want to move from negative to neutral language. And so we had talked about, instead of saying the disabled, the handicapped, people with disabilities. I also want to encourage you all to pay attention to some of these next terms. So disabled parking or even handicapped entrance. The word handicapped is very archaic. It's something that's really no longer used in the disability community or even when referring to people with disabilities. So I encourage you all to pay attention as you are out in the community. Look at those parking signs, look at the bathroom signs, look at just the doorways, automatic doors, anything that's accessible. Pay attention to the signage. Does it say handicap? Does it say accessible? Does it just have the accessible symbol on it? You'll notice that as buildings are being renovated and new buildings are going up, a lot of the language is changing, which is really awesome. And so the great work that we are all collectively doing, that you are all collectively doing, is really getting out there in the community. And so we just got to keep that up. And again, just talks more about wheelchair, confined to a wheelchair, wheelchair bound, more neutral terminology, person who uses a wheelchair or wheelchair user, as I mentioned earlier.
One of, I think, your favorite quotes is this whole thing about and thinking about what is disability, what is the equipment that we use, and how is that utilized. And I think it's pretty cool that you're able to think about disability in a different way.
Yes, so specifically on the term wheelchair bound, Simi Linton said this, and I absolutely love it. It isn't a device that binds us or limits us. It's an ally, it's an accommodation, which is absolutely true. I just shared a little bit about my power wheelchair and how it helps me to get around in the community, get around my home, get around the office. So it's not binding me, it's not limiting me, it's my accommodation, it's my technology. Again, it's an extension of my body helping me to be independent and successful every day. And so it's important to stress the idea of using people first language and how crucial that is. People first language puts the person before the disability, and it describes who a person is, not what a person has. And absolutely, words have power. I think we all know that, and that's something that we absolutely need to remember, especially when we're communicating with and for people with disabilities. Just wanted to take a moment and talk about identity first language, and just to stress again, and Danny had talked a little bit about this earlier when we were talking about the medical and social model. So disability is a part of a person's identity. It's modeled after how we talk about other traits of people. This is definitely used by people who are actively involved in the disability culture and pride and in advocacy. If a person says that they prefer a certain type of language, use that when talking to or about them, regardless of your own preference. So again, this just talks about disability being a part of a person's identity, a part of their life. It is a huge part of my life. I am absolutely proud to be living with a disability. I see my life as a gift. This is a way that I can use my words in my life, if you will, to help educate all of you, to help educate people I encounter every day, to really and truly just educate the world so we can have more of a collective body of people and not just focus so much on differences. We really have more similarities than we do have differences, and I think that's something that we all need to reflect on often and really think back on. So again, just some more self-reflection for today. We encourage y'all just to really think about your first experience with a person with a disability. Maybe that was in school, maybe that was at home, in your neighborhood, growing up as a child, or maybe it was just last week coming into the office and meeting a new coworker or clients that you're working with. But it's always important to kind of think about these experiences of interacting with people with disabilities and just kind of put yourself in check of where your attitudes and language and all of that is really stemming from.
Thank you so much, Liz. I always learn so much from you and also from Danny. A lot of times, what people ask us is, "Now you've told us this information. How do I put it to work? What can you do? What can you tell me, and how to communicate with folks, or and how to change things?" And so, we're just going to give you some communication tips, specifically looking at communication tips in general, but also diving in a tiny bit when it comes to folks with physical disabilities and people who have hearing-related disabilities, vision-related disabilities, etc. So don't be afraid to make a mistake. I find that sometimes people avoid the conversation or they avoid saying hello or what have you. Just, say hello and don't be afraid to make the mistake. Let people know. If you have a question, ask, right? If you're not sure about something, ask. It's okay. Always be respectful. I also always assume competence. I think that's important, and so don't make assumptions about what a person can or cannot do. Ask before giving assistance. I think that sometimes that's one of the big mistakes, is that folks just assume that somebody needs an assistance in a specific area. I was out not long ago at a meeting, and somebody who doesn't know me super well but knows I have dyslexia just started reading something to me, and I was like, you know what, actually I have an app on my phone that can read that, but I actually wrote what you're reading to me. And so, it's okay, thank you. But if I needed help with reading, I would have asked for it. So just know, and I also appreciated the spirit in which they were trying to help me, but I also, wanted to make sure that they knew that I had it covered, and it's okay. So if somebody with a disability is accompanied by another individual, if you're talking and you need to talk to the individual with a disability, talk directly to them rather than speaking through the other person. This happens often, and we used to see this a lot. And I still see it occasionally where even with my daughter, people will say, well, what does she want for dinner? And I'm like, Mira, what do you want for dinner? Or I'll say, ask her. Same thing with services. Mira is going to be looking for a job sometime soon. She's going through that transition piece. And we were, believe it or not, actually we were over at a career center. And the person there said, what does she need? And I was like, Mira, what do you need? The same thing. It's Mira's story. It's Mira's life. It's Mira's journey. Ask Mira, right? Not me just because I happen to drive her there. Treat adults as adults. There's a tendency sometimes to treat people with disabilities as children. Treat adults as adults, and also expect diversity of preferences and opinions. I may want something very specific. I may want a different background or a different font or what have you, and that's okay. But somebody else who might have dyslexia may want something the same. So Liz?
So some communication tips when it comes to interacting with individuals with physical disabilities. It's important to respect the individual's personal space. That personal space can include a person's wheelchair, their crutches, or other mobility aid. My power wheelchair, the components of it, that is, again, all an extension of my body. So I really do appreciate it when people respect that. I have definitely been in situations when I've met people right away and they have maybe put their bag on my chair or they're leaning on my chair. That is not okay because, again, that's an extension of my body, not a piece of furniture or just a piece of equipment out there without a person attached to it. It's important to never move someone's equipment, their crutches, their walker, their cane, or mobility aid without permission. That can actually be very dangerous. That person is relying on that maybe for balance or for moving around, and so they need to have it close by. Do not push a person's wheelchair or grab the arm of someone walking with difficulty without first asking if you can help. And I think as we are all going through these communication tips, as Carol mentioned, we're going to talk about asking first for help before just jumping right in. I think that's very important. Again, you don't want to push a person's wheelchair. This power wheelchair is very heavy. It's got automatic brakes. I've had people come up to me often and just try to push my chair, and it's not going to move. I can move it myself, and I'll move it when I'm ready to move it. So I think that's important to know. And this is another helpful tip. This is something I personally appreciate. If you are going to be speaking to somebody who is using a chair or sitting down for more than just a few minutes, maybe grab a seat yourself, or lean over. People have asked me, "Gosh, is that condescending if I squat down?" I actually think it's very respectful because you are at my eye level and we're communicating as two individuals at the same level. I don't have somebody towering over me and having to look up. Often it changes the dynamic. So just some helpful tips there.
Those are so helpful. When we're building upon those and thinking about folks with hearing related disabilities or people within the deaf community, the big D community, deaf, we encourage you to ask the person how he or she prefers to communicate, or how they prefer to communicate. Making sure that you are communicating in the way that is the most effective. Before you start to speak, make sure that the person has an understanding that you're speaking to them. Get their attention. Speak in clear and very expressive manner. You don't have to yell. You don't have to exaggerate your lips or anything like that. Just speak clearly and as directly as you can. Unless asked, really make sure that it's a normal tone. There are times that people have asked me to speak louder or speak softer, and that's okay. Once again, like I had said a few minutes ago, when you're talking with somebody who's using an interpreter, you want to make sure you are talking directly to the person, not to the interpreter. And if you're speaking like through an interpreter, remember that interpreter could lag a few minutes behind or a few words behind. So pause occasionally and give some time to catch up. Additionally, when we're moving and thinking about cognitive disabilities, try to be as alert as possible to the person's responses so that you can adjust your method of communication. A lot of times people, they say, oh gosh, so-and-so has a communication disability if they use a speech device, for example, or if they are deaf, or if they have a hearing-related disability. And I've got to tell you that actually some of the people that I'm putting this in air quotes that have communication-related disabilities are actually some of the best communicators I've ever met. When we're talking with folks that have cognitive disabilities, use language that's concrete, not a lot of metaphors, you don't want it to be too abstract. And so just be as direct and concrete as possible. Some of our folks, some of the people that we work with and that you work with traumatic brain injuries or brain injuries, it could also be a short-term memory issue. And so you may have to repeat yourself and you may need to give additional information. That's why, just like we're showing in this presentation, that we're telling you the information, we're explaining the information, and you also have it in a print form. So we're practicing what we teach. And if we move to the next piece here, when we're talking about folks that have cognitive disabilities, auditory perceptual problems, I have auditory processing. You may indeed have to repeat. It's not necessarily a hearing thing, but it could be an issue when it comes to understanding exactly what you're saying or the way that their brain is processing. So, taking notes to help them remember, giving directions, sequence of tasks, different things like that. Also thinking about sensory overload, making sure that you're not giving too much information. I've been into workplace settings, and sometimes there's an abundance or a flood of information that comes quickly. So what we've done with some of the folks that we're working with cognitive disabilities is we've broken those into segments, those meetings or what have you into segments, as opposed to this, here are all these forms and here's all this information and here are your rights, so that people understand. Don't pretend to understand if you don't. People fall into this all the time. They do that nod and smile and yes. Don't do it. If you don't understand what the person's asking you, then ask the person to repeat what was said. And if you have to ask several times, ask. And once again, make sure that if somebody is responding slowly, that you're giving time and you're being respectful and you're being a very good communication partner.
All right, so tips were when communicating with people that are blind or low vision. An important one is to identify yourself when you approach a person who is blind. If a new person approaches, introduce them as well. This is a big one. I myself am a bit of a quiet walker, so I tend to kind of creep in. So it's always good to announce. It's also important to Announce yourself when you're leaving as well, so that you don't leave an individual talking to an empty room. I do that sometimes too, in that I talk to an empty room because somebody's popped out and they were just outside my field of vision and I didn't notice. As with any of these, never push, pull, or grab a blind person. Because one, if they're using their cane, the cane is there for a reason. It's to help find the environmental barriers that you might encounter. But it could also put the person off balance. Or you could just startle them. And really, let's keep our hands to ourselves when we are interacting with the people that are blind. Again, alert people who are blind to or visually impaired to posted information. If there's a sign, if there's a warning, if there's something important that they should know, it's okay to say, oh, hey, there's a sign there that says, the bridge is out. It's good to know. It's good to be aware of these things. Never hesitate to use words like see and look or look over there. It's okay. Remember, with a lot of this, it's okay to make a mistake, but it's also okay to use perfectly normal language. Like, look over there. Did you see what happened on the news last night? I did. I saw it, I heard it, I took it in. And then don't use a lot of hand signals or gestures. That's probably not going to end well if you're trying to convey important information with hand gestures. So just keeping that in mind. And one of my favorites that's not up here, a former colleague and I, we always talk about how, saying over there, where? Using concrete language, sometimes important with people with visual disabilities as well.
Yes. So the next 3 slides just give some more information about communication tips. This one, try not to finish sentences or guess what the person is saying. That's really the main point that we want to drive home on this. And also just make sure that, once again, you're being accurate. When we're talking with folks that use specifically alternative augmentative communication devices, and that's abbreviated as AAC, just know that the person and acknowledge that there are multiple modes of communication. The person may speak with you, they may gesture, they may use some low tech, they may also use some high tech. So make sure that you're aware of what their preferences are. Also, get an idea, and often I ask, is it okay if I read along, or are you going to speak directly to me, or how do we want to communicate? And then the last piece here, the last slide as we wrap up, is really about communication rights. And so we encourage you to think about this and really embrace these. So people with disabilities, they should be spoken to. We should be spoken to, spoken with, communicated with respect and courtesy. Also, we should be communicated with directly, not talked about in the third person, especially while we're sitting there. Also not spoken for. I believe everybody has something to say. Everybody has a right to say it. And then also think about and really, when we're talking about communication rights, have clear, meaningful conversations that are, culturally and linguistically appropriate.
Here's the information to contact us at Tools for Life. The phone number is 1-800-497-8665. You can visit the Tools for Life website at www.gatfl.gatech.edu. And again, we're with the Tools for Life program under the Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation, CIDI, here at Georgia Tech.